Before we get into the next podcast, it's kind of become a budding tradition that we sometimes take the opportunity, for your sake, to kind of do an introduction to the topic. Once again, the purpose of our podcasts is to inform a highly educated community of managers and leaders on how to perfect their management and leadership skills, specifically in projects, programs, portfolios, and PMOs. So sometimes if we feel it can help the understanding of the podcast conversation to go into a little bit more structured detail with slides, we'd like to do that. So we're going to take the opportunity. What we're going to be talking about in this podcast specifically is a capability model. What we're going to be talking about in this podcast specifically is a capability model. I'll tell you exactly which capability model that is. And we kind of want to do an introduction, a fair and neutral introduction of a couple capability models. Now, we've done personality models previously, and we did an introduction on that as well. But we're going to go into specifically capability models, okay? How to assess and maximize the performance of your resources. That's kind of the driving thing. So what are capabilities, often also called competencies? I prefer the word capabilities, but some people refer to it as competencies. Skills and abilities that have theoretically the possibility of enabling you to master certain difficulties, solve problems, make good and fast decisions, and achieve goals and objectives. It's kind of, you need a certain capability or competency to do a pole vault. What those are specifically: speed, running, holding pole, arching your back, any number of different things would come into play. Skills and abilities that also have the possibility of influence others positively. So in the interaction or communication, those are also capabilities. To win an argument, that's a capability, right? To self-select and learn from the successes and mistakes of others. To master our lives, be happy, healthy, and successful. That's kind of that balanced workplace that we're talking about. Be successful at our job and to get promoted. That's also what we need capabilities for. And they help us overcome what we can't do or don't know. So that's one element of project management, is dealing with the unknown and developing certain broad capabilities that help us deal with the unknown is definitely a skill set we need to take a look at. Okay, so why are they so important, and why do we need to consider development? Without certain capabilities, we can't master our lives or our projects, right? We lose out on opportunities that pop up in our life. There's this wonderful quote that says, "Success is when opportunity meets preparation," right? Some people would say luck is when opportunity meets preparation. No, luck kind of leaves out the capability factor. It kind of leaves it up to chance. In capability building, our focus is what can we do from a proactive perspective to be prepared for the opportunities that come up. They're also important because we fail at achieving our goals and objectives if we don't have them. We end up being the weak link in the chain. There's this old saying, you're only as strong as the weakest link in your organization. That's not quite always true. There's some ways to perceive and identify weak links and to neutralize them, but that's also a capability we need to take a look at, right? You aren't a reliable and desirable human resource, which is the last thing you want to do. You don't want to be that kid on the playground that when they're picking teams, one team or the other, you never get picked, or you're the last person to be picked, right? So what are competency models? Competency models are professional, structured frameworks that make the attempt of assessing to define skills and behaviors and knowledge of individuals that need to perform their roles specifically. Okay, so basically, what do I mean with framework? Framework means it gives this topic vocabulary, it gives it a process, it gives it a structure on how to proceed, right? These models help organizations develop, assess, improve competencies in their workforce, in their team. So either on a broad perspective or on a specific perspective, right? Here's a short list of competency models that are a subsector of personality models. They all have a personality factor. Some of them have personality factors in them. Some of them don't. T-shaped model we'll talk about real briefly. Lohminger, SHRM, and the one that we actually want to introduce to you this is what the podcast will be about, will be the KOAN or KOAN PM, and we'll take a look at that. So let's kind of go through it real quickly. T model, as old as the hills. Very straightforward and basic, a very basic understanding of competencies. What it basically says, the T model, is we start off with I development. In Japanese, we say shuhari. Shu means I'm an apprentice, right? So you start down here as a novice. I don't know anything, and my approach to learning is I will listen to my master and learn from them. I shut up and listen, right? Ha means I achieve a certain level of junior, intermediate, maybe even expert level, where now I have autonomy, I have authority, and I have a skill set. And Ri is true mastery, which means I understand the process so well that I can adapt the process and change the process and still be at a higher level of performance. Now, most of us, our education program is based on the I model, right? You have a broad perspective of things that you learn in school, but you commit in college, you commit to a degree. In your work, you commit to a certain department, and this is where your development is. Strangely enough, once we want to move up in the hierarchy of an organization, our specific skill set, engineering, IT, marketing, whatever it might be, is not sufficient, because to be able to move up in the ranks, you have to be able to manage people, and that's where the T development. So your technical skill has to be, if you're an engineer, you're going to have to learn something a little bit about stakeholder management or marketing, right? You might have to know a little bit about financials, about impact measurement, about communication, about leadership, about management. In fact, when I coach a lot of project managers, the first thing they say, listen, I'm a super engineer. Why do I need to know something about conflict resolution? Screw conflict. Why do I have to be able to learn something about emotional intelligence? That's not what I went to school for. But to be effective in their next role requires not only an extensive I development, but also T development. And this is a very rudimentary model that explains the following models that come up. Okay? So this is one that I've been exposed to. There's an interesting book out there called FYI. It doesn't stand for your information. It stands for your improvement. And it is actually a work that was developed on the research of Lominger, a gentleman, and Korn Ferry, one of the executive search companies out there, uses this model kind of to assess people. Okay, developed by Michael Lombardo and Robert Eichinger. It's a leadership development model. It assesses three core categories: strategic skill, operating skills, leadership skills. And what's interesting is they've actually taken some time to do some research and said, okay, how many competencies, loosely spoken, do we have to play with? What are the ingredients that I have to cook with? And they come up with 67. You can disagree or agree, but it's an interesting framework to start off with, right? What's it good for? Leadership development programs, talent management, succession planning, to identify high potential leaders, and to help leaders at all levels develop their key competencies and also get feedback from other people, right? So this is what we're looking at. Now, we're not going to go through all of these in great detail, but these are the 67. And like I said, the very basic level, like managing diversity might be one. That's interesting. Delegation, how to be able to delegate. Dealing with paradoxes, that's one of my favorite. Conflict management. Composure, which means how do I stand in front of other people? How do I hold myself in a place of conflict? Career ambition, business acumen, negotiating. Patience is a competence. You might say, this is really on a very basic level. Yes, but these are the ingredients with which to cook to provide you an opportunity to become a better manager and a better leader. Now, they actually have a maturity model in Lominger that starts off with level 1, right? And you get points for being able to have these things, whether you're action-oriented, these are the competencies, customer-focused, results-driven, financially aware, convey legitimacy, all that kind of stuff. So that's level 1. Then there's a level 2, based on the points that you get, another 8 points. Then you have a level 3, then you have a level 4, level 5, kind of how maturity models work. We'll provide you a download option for this PDF. I'm not going to go through this in great detail. That's something that we'll do in the Academy. But this is just kind of to introduce you and soften you up to the topic of competencies models, right? A next competency model is called the SHRM. It comes from the field of human resources. It allows here in a different framework, a different approach to understanding it, 9 key competencies across 3 domains, and you basically have them broken down here, right? So you have behavioral competencies with leadership, business, interpersonal, right? So those are the 3 domains, and in the 3 domains, you have leadership and navigation, ethical practice, you have business acumen, consultation, critical evaluation, relationship management, global. Now you might say, isn't this kind of redundant, overlapping? Yeah, they all talk about the same things, but whether they come up with 3 domains or 4 domains or 5 domains or 9 key competencies or 67, that's where it varies a little bit, okay? And like I said, I'm not doing advertisement for you using one model or the other, but being able to select the right competency model for you requires you to know what's out there, okay? Then we have the Spencers and Spencers. Behavioral competency comes from general management, defines competencies in 5 domains. Those 5 domains are skills, knowledge, motives, traits, and self-concepts. These competencies go into critical behavior, which create and generate performance, okay? Once again, a different framework with similar elements, okay? All of these models are basically used for the same thing. There's a second model that's used by Korn Ferry, which is an add-on a little bit higher up, which is called the Leadership Architect Competency Model. It's used for leadership and executive development, once again developed by Korn Ferry. Here they focus on 60 competencies for leaders, 4 domains: cognitive skills, results-oriented, leadership skills, and interpersonal competency. Once again, if you're interested in that, that's something to do some research on. Then the OECD, which is a NGO based on close to the UN, that's responsible for developing government competencies internationally, public administration and governance, has 4 domains: investigate the world, recognize perspectives, communicate ideas, take action. This is a little bit broader. And here you kind of have a breakdown: knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values. Here are the different skill sets that you have to, and how these go into extended competencies that develop then this mindset, this 4-stage mindset of being able to investigate the world, recognize perspectives, communicate ideas, and take action. This is I would say, probably one of the most in-depth ones we've taken a look at, because it takes a look at the whole value chain, not just the competencies, but what would be the outcome and the impact of using this. I kind of like this model, okay? For those of you who are interested in project management, if you're IPMA affiliated or certified, this might be interesting. IPMA, quite some time ago, came up with a competency model called ICB 4.0. It has 3 domains and 28 You might say, can anybody make up their mind how many Look, pick what works for you, okay? These are all frameworks that address the same thing. Pick which one works for you, right? So the 3 domains are people and practice. You could also say process, because that's what that's talking about, and perspective, the way we look at the world. And here you have the 28 competencies broken down here. In people, it's self-reflection, integrity, communication skills, relationship and engagement, leadership, teamwork, conflict, crisis. In the process area or practice area, you have design, objectives, and benefits, how you manage time, right? Perspectives is what is your strategy, your governance model, your compliance standards, your powers and interests. So this is the IPMA way of saying, listen, if you are IPMA affiliated and you want to know how good you are at project, program, and portfolio management, this would be a model that you can use. PMI, a little bit after IPMA, came up with their own version, okay? And they have 3 core, competencies, which are technical skills. Every project manager needs some kind of technical know-how. They definitely have to be a leader. That's a different skill set category. You have strategic and business models. Now, here it's called competencies. I would probably say that's the equivalent of domains, okay? They've reversed the vocabulary. The 8 domains are stakeholder, team, development, lifecycle, planning, project work, delivery, measurement, and volatility, uncertainty, conflict, and complexity and ambiguity. And then you have some principles. Quite honestly, if I was listening to myself, and I would probably be exhausted and overwhelmed, okay? Once again, what we're going to try to do here, what we want to start the podcast with, is to show you the prospects out there. There's a broad spectrum of frameworks that can help you assess the skill sets of your teams, develop a development program for them, and then to reassess them and let them know. What are we going to focus on this podcast? We're going to focus on a specific one that uses both the PMI talent triangle and the competency model from IPMA. So if you work with any one of these, you can also use this one in particular, okay, called KOAN or KOAN, if you use it from, comes from Zen Buddhism. We'll talk about what that means. This model here is a tool that will allow you specifically for projects, programs, and portfolio management to evaluate individuals, team competencies, to say, listen, if we are working in a project environment, do we have the skill sets to do the best job possible? Okay? It's an online tool that we can use to evaluate your team. By the way, it's an open source thing, so you don't always need consultants to help you with this. You can be trained by them, and then you can use the system yourself, okay? It's used as a way to predict behavior, okay? One of the great things about this model is it's based on a 360 model. So it's not just if you're the project manager, you get to evaluate yourself. Your sponsor or superior will also have the opportunity, and then you have the possibility of assessing, synthesizing what you've assessed to come together and agree upon something, maybe a common view, or agree what you don't agree upon, and then to take action. That ASA is a key part of it, right? Here's a cute acronym, what KOAN stands for: knowing competencies, being able to help project managers find out what to rely on, to define ambitions, and to make sure that you nominate the best project manager. That's kind of a cute marketing term. I don't know if it really works. I think what actually helps here a little bit, and we'll talk about this in the podcast, is KOAN is a Zen Buddhist principle that's kind of like a parable, a Greek parable. It's generally a short story that has a certain paradox element to it, and this is the brilliant part of these koans. They don't just rely on the wisdom of the teacher or the master in the story. The student has just as much to contribute to the learning factor. And it also kind of teaches you that life is not usually one truth. It's often a cosmic paradox where two seemingly contradictory terms can be in the same space, but still be true and relevant, okay? This is the model that we want to introduce to you in this podcast. So enjoy. We look forward to your feedback. Hi, this is your Project Management Cowboy coming back to you with our next podcast. We have the topic of capability measurement models today. We've had the privilege and joy of having two previous podcasts that deal a little bit with personality models and psychometrics. We've done the POPI model. We've done the process communication model. And I had the fortunate experience of a gentleman, Lieven Cornelis, reaching out to me on LinkedIn saying, hey, you know what? I see that you have a lot to do with project management. I see that you have a lot to do with PMI. Do you know that there's a capability measurement and development model for project management? And my ears did this, okay? Like I said, we serve the broad management and leadership community, but our loving focus, our passionate focus is anybody that has to do with projects, programs, portfolios, and PMOs. So of course we were interested. Without further ado, Lieven, what a pleasure to have you in our podcast. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for reaching out to me. We've already had a couple previous discussions, and you definitely piqued my interest. So maybe we should kind of set the stage or the ambition for this podcast. We love to introduce people who know things that we don't know, and we like to ask lots of hopefully intelligent questions. I don't mind calling them stupid questions because I think the best questions are the stupid questions, right? So that our potential listeners and our audience can assess what is it that Lieven knows that would be relevant to me, how can we use it, and what would be further steps. So without further ado, would you like to introduce yourself real briefly?
Okay, so my name is Lieven. I'm a psychologist by study, and I've been working in talent management ever since I started working, basically. I love to combine training with research and especially development of new tools, new reports, and with always a focus on the usefulness. That's key.
Was there a particular incident that helped you to make a decision that you were going to go into this field, or was it by chance? I think a lot of careers start by chance.
I think it was a deliberate choice. That's already a long time ago. I'm not that young anymore. And so at a certain moment, I quitted the company where I worked, and I decided to go into the field of tools development. Mm-hmm. And so it was really the deliberate choice to go that road.
Did you sense an imminent need, to use a marketing term, or a need in your previous company that said, hey, this would be useful, this is what the world is looking for?
Sorry, can you repeat?
When you were in your company, you said you left your company and made a specific choice to go into this field. Was there a particular need that you sensed within your company that say, hey, this is lacking, this is something that I'd like to dedicate my life to? What was the incident or the recognition of how things are going in the world that you said, hey, this would be valuable?
Yes, it was indeed. Basically, at the company I was working for, they still have their own competence, not personality test, basically, not really competencies, but personality test. And several times I've got a question as a consultant to, hey, can we use it in our global company? Can we rent it or buy it or whatever? Mm-hmm. And the company I worked for was a very close company saying, okay, no, it's ours. No one touches it. And that's opposite to my mindset, where I like to share. And so when I left the company, I really had at least 3 major companies who came during the work I did, who came with the question, can we buy it? Can we use it whenever, whatever the payment would be? And so I knew there was some interest in the market for high level tools.
So for a little bit more open source methodology, yes. Not so proprietary, you have to pay licenses and you have to do it our way, or you can't use it at all time mentality.
Yeah, I think if you share things, the richness is multiple afterwards, because then you get input from others and you get a kind of a very concrete co-creationship. Mm-hmm. While if you really want to keep things for yourself, they will escape you anyway.
Yeah.
But you miss out the chance to enrich it by the input of others.
Yeah, I think that's a valuable approach. So in our first podcast that we did on this subject matter, we did a short intro, and I did some research, and I found there's up to approximately 2,500 models, personality models out there. Of course, there's the top 6 or 7 or 8 that people are familiar with, NTBA and DISC and things like that. What made you say the world needs another model, other than the proprietary thing? What does your system have that adds value that wasn't here before? And why do we need a 2,501 model?
No, it will be much more in the future, I'm sure. Now with artificial intelligence, this number will even increase. The reason why I believe that I can add value to the world, to say, in this field, is that we always have this kind of tailor-made approach and adjustment of everything we do to the needs of the customer. Mm-hmm. And to models that are developed by specialists in their field, like, for example, PMI, IPMA. They have developed their own models. I'm sure they really have good reasons to have this particular model in place. They have been researching it and all that. So my approach is then to say, okay, we make the link between the existing models that they, in their field, like IPMA, PMI, have developed, with underlying personality traits. Mm-hmm. So it's not wanting to have the ultimate new personality model. Mm-hmm. The second element is also key to us, is as from the start in the development, is that it's for usage in professional environment.
Mm-hmm. Okay. which I think is a key standalone, a unique selling proposition to what you're offering. Let me ask you a question. Most of the models will use the name personality test. I think it's nice to know people's personalities, but I think one of the kind of residual feelings that people have when they have a personality test, this is interesting, but what the hell do I do with it? Right? Now you are in the category of personality tests, but your focus is on capabilities. Am I correct?
On talent development, basically.
On talent development. So you're one step more concrete. It says it's nice that everybody has their own personality. You don't say this, but I'm going to say this. Who cares? The question is, what are your capabilities? It's kind of a more neutral approach. What are your capabilities? Can we assess? Can we identify them? Can we assess them? Is there a quantitative approach to defining them? Mm-hmm. Okay. And I guess the objective would then be to identify how to develop people further. Is that correct?
That's correct. So basically, every person has his own personality, mm-hmm. and there's always kind of uniqueness in it. So whatever it is, there is kind of uniqueness in every single personality. And the main goal is to find out what are the strengths, whatever the personality is, and how can this person feel better, do better, act better, mm-hmm. Exploit basically better what is given to this personality. Okay. So there is no good or bad personality. It's mm-hmm. really how, in what setting can this personality fit best, and how can it develop further?
Is there a link between personality and capabilities?
Depends on
question.
How would you define capability? That's an important.
Yeah, I think we should. This is what I was a big fan of. I think we need to respect our listeners and say, maybe we need to ask the real stupid question: what the hell is a capability? A capability is a skill set, or it's something that it's a threshold measurement of being able to do something. Mm-hmm. Right? If we look at, and there's a bunch of different models out there. If we, for example, take from Korn Ferry, the Lominger model, I think he identified 64, 68 key capabilities. And I like that. I like their approach because it's very basic level. Like, how good mm-hmm. are you at presenting?
Right.
How good are your communication skills? How empathetic are you? These are base capabilities, which mm-hmm. I think we're going to take a notch up, because your capability is even more professional. It doesn't just take the basics. It actually says, hey, listen, if you've got a project team, you might want to measure whether or not they're capable of actually managing this type of project, right? So my definition of a capability, or I guess the universal definition of capabilities, would be a skill set that enables you to overcome, achieve, interact, get things done. Would you concur with that?
Yeah, but in general, it's called competencies.
Okay.
So in competencies, you have three key elements. Mm-hmm. The first competency is the knowledge, mm-hmm. which is simply to be measured by an examination.
Okay.
The second competency.
When you say knowledge, are you leaning towards the classical IQ or EQ, or does it take more really than one intelligence into consideration?
Something that you learn that you can be examined.
Okay. Yeah.
So, for example, if you are going for a veterinary study, then at the end of the year you get some kind of examination, and you have to prove whether you know it or not.
Okay. But this knowledge testing tests rote memory or cognitive? Probably both, right?
It's both, but it's really, so competencies, the global idea of competencies has to be split up in three elements.
Okay, which is knowledge was the first one, the second one?
The explicit knowledge, you can call it.
Yeah.
The second one is implicit knowledge, which is extremely difficult to transfer.
Okay. Give us a short definition of what you understand on implicit knowledge.
Well, for example, it's maybe a strange, a strange thing. I think I told you before that I'm a rowing coach, and I'm learning people how to enter the boat. Mm-hmm. And there is one particular way to close the gate of the boat, where you put the oar in, is that you take the boat out of the water, you put the gate in, you put the oar in the gate, and you close it, and you put it back. Mm-hmm. This is my way. I like to do it like that. It's kind of not always. I mean, most of the people don't do it, but I have rather short time. So for me, it works well. And recently I was teaching someone to do it, a short person. And then all of a sudden she said, but you lift the boat much higher than what you tell me.
Okay.
So I lifted to my chest. And this is the implicit knowledge I didn't know myself. I just know.
So could we say that explicit knowledge could be external? It could be more formalized, and implicit knowledge is the thing, the knowledge that you develop through personal experience.
Yes.
Some of it being conscious, and a lot of it being subconscious or even unconscious.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, good. That's a definition I think we can work with. Good. Yeah. And the third one?
And the third one is really personality. Linked competency. These are really behaviors. So what is one doing?
Yeah.
And so that are really the competencies that this is my focus. Okay. Meaning, what is a person doing? And if you can define what a person is doing or capable of doing by personality, then you can also work on it to train it better.
Okay. Now, how long did it take you to develop your model?
Well, we have several models, so it's depending on. We have, for example, a model for entrepreneurship. We have a model for sales. So basically, the competency models we try to align it with the specific
with the field.
With the field, indeed.
Okay.
Yeah.
What would be the difference between models that don't do that and your model?
Well, the models that don't do that are the generic models, and while generic model, of course, is very interesting if you want to have a kind of generic overall image, you're missing out the chance of to be very specific for a salesperson. For example, if you think about what's called a hunter, a person who really need to find new customers and to sign the deals, the closing, like it's called, is one specific competency which is not needed at all in some other areas.
Yeah. So you actually the benefit of being more precise in your field of work is that you focus on the clear competencies that are needed, and there's different competencies that a salesperson would need versus an engineer.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And so the same if you look at the project management, the personality competencies. Let's say if you think about communication, all over, whether you are a portfolio manager or director or whatever the title, or you're a project manager, communication always is important in human interaction, basically, and specifically in project management. And so, the communication skills that one needs on a portfolio level, they are different than what one needs on a project management level.
So you even differentiate between the different hierarchies of project management, portfolio, program, and project management?
Yeah, we do have a 2-level approach. We say, okay, this is something people have in common, whatever the level. And this are competent or behaviors that are very specific for that or that level.
Actually, I mean, if you think about it, it makes sense. I would probably say it makes developing a system that can be applied to these different levels more difficult, right? If it's less generic and more specific, because I think aren't the two, correct me, you're the expert. One of the things I picked up from Karina, which was another psychologist that I talked to, the two variables that are often used in assessing the value of a personality model or a competency model is, and correct me if I'm using the wrong terminology, I think validity, right? The veracity of it, right? Is it true what it's saying? And the second part is the preciseness, right? Is it accurate for the situation, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'm presuming that these two metrics were also something that came into play when developing your system, right?
Well, we apply at least 4 parameters.
Okay, which are?
So just
Lieven, can you hold on just a second, because I'm totally nervous. I just saw that my electric plug is not plugged in, and I don't want the computer to go off. So let me fix that real quick, and don't forget your train of thought. And don't forget to cut this out. Okay, good. So you were talking about the 4 parameters that you used to create your system. And by the way, let's say this up front. You have a specific name for your system so that people would say, hey, what are they talking about? Where do I look this up? What's the name of your system?
Which the generic name is the KOAN, and that's a personality system. Mm-hmm. And based on that, we derive we link it to the different models from IPMA, PMI, and others, or we create ourselves for sales and entrepreneurship.
So you call it KOAN, right? KOAN?
It's the KOAN.
What does that stand for?
Well, it's one of the key principles from the Zen Buddhism.
Oh.
Yeah. I found out afterwards. Basically, it came from a kind of typo, and then someone said, "Oh, but it's a great concept." So I studied.
So, what does KOAN mean in Buddhism?
In KOAN in Buddhism means it's a small story that, and now in total something like 2,500, 3,000 such stories, and they always have some elements in common. Number one, they are always a kind of paradox, just like human beings.
Yeah.
Okay. Number two, with 2,500, you'll never finish study.
Yeah.
Just like you finished.
So continuous learning.
Yeah. And number three, in the KOAN concept is the feedback from the pupil is as worthful as the feedback from the mentor.
Gosh, that is brilliant. So first of all, I thought that the statement, because I'm a big fan of cosmic paradoxes, which I think the biggest problem we have in modern management is that we often want the truth. And the problem is that the truth is often two truths that contradict one another, but in unison create that yin yang. Yeah. Right? And the second thing that I think is great, and I guess this is part of one of your underlying philosophies, because I know you have a 360 method in your model as well, that you say, listen, the teacher is valuable, but you're a teacher as well, right? One of the things we know as teachers is we learn just as much from our students as they do from us.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. So that's great. So that's how you came up with the name. I interrupted you. You were going to tell us what were the 4 parameters that you used to create your system. We'd been talking about beforehand validity and precision. What were the parameters that you used? Well,
it's overlapping, of course, but number one, it should be concrete.
Okay. Oh, I love that. So not so vague, because I think that's one of the challenges between, let me put it this way. If you sit down and you study something, there's always some kind of academic approach to it. And I think one of the dangers of academic approach or process is that we become so abstract. We use such highfalutin, such vague vocabulary because we're trying to hide our uncertainty. That uncertainty is transferred to the person who's trying to learn, and they said, okay, I heard you. I have no idea what the hell you're saying. So you're saying at the end of the day, the measurement is it concrete? Awesome. Okay. Yeah. Does it say something?
But like you say, the academic, whether it's academic or not, is not important. But for example, if people are using ChatGPT and the other models, Copilot, whatever, or the French model, by the way, if you use that, sometimes Mistral Chat, it's also a beautiful system. And in the AI, a word that is coming back all the time that drives me crazy is active listening.
What's what I call a bingo word, a bullshit bingo word. Exactly. Everybody knows what active is, everybody knows what listening is, but nobody knows what active listening is.
It's coming back all the time. And it's just a bullshit word.
Yeah.
So if you want to describe someone who's really eager to learn and to listen, then you should never use that word because it doesn't say anything.
Yeah. It's kind of a redundancy. So, yeah. But that also presupposes the assumption that people, when they listen, actively listen.
Yeah.
So the first one was concrete. What was the second parameter?
Observable.
Oh, I love that. And this is also relevant to our listener, because if our listener says, hey, listen, if I were to use the KOAN, what benefits is going to give me? So 1, it's concrete. 2, it's observable. Let me ask you another question. So you'd mentioned beforehand that one of the driving forces behind your system was to create a system that was, I don't know if open source is the correct term, but was more accessible, more usable by others.
Yeah.
And these are two parameters that create a definite unique selling proposition to say, listen, this is something that, of course, somebody can hire you to do it, but this is something that you could do yourself. Is that correct?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, good. And number three?
Number three is it should be relevant.
I love your choice of words. Yeah. Does it, so relevant mean, does it pertain to the context? Does it pertain to the situation? What do I care if I'm measuring a certain part of your implicit or explicit knowledge or your personality if it has no relevance for the job? Awesome. And number four?
Number four, it should be accurate.
Accurate. Okay. Now there's a whole semantic thing between the difference between being accurate and precise. Accurate is a more direct, target focused statement. Precise is if I'm shooting at a target with a bow and an arrow, and all four arrows go in the same area but nowhere near the bullseye. I'm being precise. Accurate means I'm getting close to the bullseye. So I like that choice of words. Now these are our four high bars to set for success. How did you guarantee that your KOAN system is all of these four?
Well, I think I mentioned to you before that I love this quote of Mark Twain. I'm sending you a long letter because I didn't find time to make it a short letter. So basically, it's a matter of time and expertise.
This was a topic that we talked about. This is how we hit it off right away, because the world is a place that loves short reels, 30 seconds, 60 seconds, bits, bytes. Everything has to be sexy, quick. But true content takes depth and time. So what you're saying is that you went into depth with it. What else? What else did you do to be able to achieve these four bars?
Well, basically, we apply what you could call the equation Q equals E to the second.
Ooh, I know of it. Hold on.
Meaning quality equals.
Go ahead. Q equals to E to the squared.
Yeah.
So Q is quality and E is what?
So it's engagement and expertise.
Oh, engagement and expertise.
And engagement is very large as a concept. I mean, it means time. It means being involved and going till the end.
Actually, it's very funny that you come up with this formula, because I picked up many decades ago, a formula that kind of defines it's kind of a formula for success. And the formula is E is equal to Q times A, which is, that's German, or in English, it would be S is equal to Q times A, which stands for success is equal to quality times acceptance. I think whoever came up with that formula copied yours. So I like it. Quality is equal to E squared, which means engagement and expertise. Interesting. Okay, great. Let's try to get a little bit more concrete, to use one of your terminologies, right? I am a CEO of a company.
Mm-hmm.
I am working on a large portfolio of portfolios. This portfolio consists of 3 to 5 different programs. I've got anywhere between, in each program, 3 to 10 different projects. And I'm listening to this podcast because I feel I have the classical imposter syndrome, and I feel that which is actually a good thing. I'm asking myself, am I good enough in my function? Is my team good enough? I'm questioning our competencies, because the nature of project management is chaotic.
Mm-hmm.
Our emotions tell us that where chaos is, incompetence is high. That's the emotion that we have. So that's how we self-reflect. If I were to say, okay, you got my attention. You don't have my interest yet, but you have my attention. We're going to use the classical AIDA model: attention, interest, desire, and action. We want to see maybe if we can guide people towards the action, so that they say, hey, I'm going to take action after this podcast. I like what I'm hearing. So what would you tell if a CEO comes to you and say, listen, this is my scenario, okay?
Mm-hmm.
What would be your approach to, or maybe I need to ask the other question, is that your classical candidate?
Yeah, of course. Very typical that what a CEO or other high-level people do are suffering, saying, okay, I'm getting stuck and I really want to move on and change things.
So one of the advantages that you can be concrete, this is they're going to be very specific. We're in a project environment, and says, well, we have a model that appeals to this. Now, if you were dealing with Siemens that works with an IPMA model, you can say, hey, we can match that. If you work with IBM that works with a PMI model, you can basically say, well, if we want to, we can basically tap into those models as well, right?
Exactly. I think that's very important that people are using some IPMA, PMI, or other Prince2 and other models. So I think as a supplier for talent management development, we need to respect that.
Yeah.
And not to say, okay, you need to replace it whatever.
With what I want.
So it's just like your car. We adjust the car to your wishes and not the inverse.
Yeah. Now let me ask you a question, because I think IPMA began with the competency model quite a bit before PMI, right?
Yeah.
We did a presentation before this podcast that we filmed that we kind of went through the different models. I think you began with the IPMA model because it existed beforehand.
Yeah.
And the IPMA model is broken down into 3 domains. 28 competencies. We kind of showed them beforehand. So the 3 domains are people, makes sense, right? Because people, most projects don't necessarily fail because of process. They usually fail because of people. I don't mean that in a judgmental sort of way. It's the emotional factor, right? Then you have practice as the second domain, and perspective is the third domain. I'm respectful towards this model. I think it's great. I don't quite understand the practice and perspective. So people make sense. Practice is, it says here, the sub competencies are design, objects, and benefits. So I guess practice is more the process. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's more the process. That's not what we are focusing on.
What do you focus on? So let's not lose train of thought. A CEO comes to you and say, "Listen, my project environment is a mess." Okay. We'll get back to this more specific model, but so he comes to you and says, "Our environment is a mess." What would be a step-by-step process support that you would be able to provide or initiate within the company so that they can overcome this situation?
Yeah. So basically, you want to have kind of a zero measurement in such a way, in such a situation, to really about where do I stand, what are my capabilities, what are my talents, how can I develop further, how can I take out the hurdles and the obstacles that we meet. We can't guarantee, of course, success. That would be stupid to say or dishonest. So we only can support it in finding the zero measurement and to say, okay, that's where you stand, and that's how can you grow, how you can grow. Now,
so does that mean you would roll out an assessment across the whole team?
It depends depends on the customer needs. So the last time we really did a complete.
Hold on, you're freezing up. Hold on.
Portfolio measurement.
Yeah.
Meaning that, sorry? So
meaning repeat that again because your screen froze.
The program, the project manager.
Hold on, Lieven, hold on. Go a step back because your screen froze. We're gonna have to cut that out. Say it again.
So, for example, last time it was with a complete portfolio, meaning we included the director up to the project planner, project manager, and program manager. So all the different levels were included. And so what we did is then, or what we would do is to say, okay, we look at personality and the capabilities from personality perspective, and so that's basically the being. So I really like always to have these two. The being is what you are, what you have to offer by nature, and then the doing is how you. And so the doing is measured by 360.
Okay.
If you have element of 360 plus the underlying capability from personality, then you really can say, okay, what can you change and how much energy will it cost? Because that's key.
That's interesting. So you kind of adhere to this KOAN principle that the student's voice is just as important as the master's, or the subordinate's voice is just as important as the boss's voice, right? So you use the 360. Do you use a generic 360 model or your own 360 model?
So we have several 360 models depending on the need of the customer. We do have for sales management or for entrepreneurship, but in perspective of this talk, so we do have models specifically for P3M, for portfolio, program, and project management that are related or that are linked to based on the PMI and IPMA model. So companies saying, okay, we use PMI, let's say, model. So then you can say, okay, how to use it further, and how can we then build training, mentoring based on what we already have developed.
So one of the advantages, this is what I always tell people when people say, why should I even be interested in IPMA, Prince 2, or PMI, the PMBOK guide, is because one way or the other, they all say the same thing, right? And instead of having this classical infighting within organizations to figure out what are the semantics, what is the nomenclature, what is the process, what are the details, how do we create a common understanding, a common process, and a common language, it's better to tap into something that's already existing. So in your scenario, when if somebody comes to you and say, listen, we work according to PMI, you can basically use the existing understanding of vocabulary to assess them, to make it relevant, okay, and to give them feedback. So they basically already have an existing checklist that they can work with, which creates familiarity of vocabulary, creates an opening as far as cognition and understanding is concerned.
So the company has already a portfolio. Let's say the company, they already have this kind of habit of talking and using in the language of PMI or IPMA. So we just align reporting and the feedback to that system.
Okay. Let me ask you another question. I shouldn't, but I'm going to. Which model do you prefer? He's going to say something diplomatic now. I know he is.
Well, very frankly, I like a little bit more PMI.
Which one?
The PMI model.
Okay.
I
didn't pay you for this, by the way.
Because it's short.
Let's be fair, because I think I've outed myself. I used to be a former founder and PMI chapter president of PMI chapter Austria. I'm very proud of PMI, but I'm neutral. I always tell people that I interact with, my passion is project management. I have a great affinity to PMI because that's where I grew up. It's kind of my clan. But I don't go running around with PMI tattooed on my forehead, right? And I don't think you do either. I think the question is.
But you asked me a clear question, so
and I appreciate your answer. So, but I wanted to say, and I'm being diplomatic now, is I think every system has its good side and bad sides. And you say there's a light leaning towards PMI. I'd love to hear what are the strengths of the PMI model that you like. And then maybe just to be fair, we can say what are some of the good sides. What do you like about the IPMA model as well? What is it about the?
So what I like about PMI that it's a pretty open field. So you have these 12 core competencies, and it's not so much defined exact inside what it exactly means. These 12 competencies. So that's what I from a point of view.
So it's simpler, which makes it easier to work with. Is that what you're saying?
It's simpler, number one, but also since it's not yet so much defined inside in the model, it gives me more chance to.
I have to digest that because I hadn't thought about it, but I like what you're saying. Because ultimately, IPMA and PMI are not the experts on a lot of these things. Okay, there are professional associations which tap into the knowledge of subject matter experts to develop their models. And what you're saying And is that if we look at the PMI model, which we've introduced at the beginning, is it basically has 3 core competency: technical, leadership, strategic, and business management. And then there's 8 performance domains and 12 deliverable principles. And I think there's a strong overlap between PMI and IPMA as always. Just the structuring and the vocabulary might be a bit different. But you said something valuable. It says, you know what? PMI is precise enough to create a rough framework, but constructively imprecise enough for you to fill the gaps.
Exactly.
I like that.
So it gives me more chance to be creative.
Yeah, and let's be fair. You're, as a psychologist who's dedicated his life to this, you're more the subject matter expert than either association is. To be fair, is there something in particular about the IPMA model that you like?
Yeah, very frankly, I really like it also because it has been elaborated very, very well. So there's been a lot of thinking, a lot of internal discussions, I guess, amongst the IPMA experts, how to things, how to clear. So it's very elaborate. So it's also very interesting. It's just different.
Yeah. So really what you're saying sounds like a paradox, but we've talked about paradoxes before. Yeah. There's an advantage to being a little bit more open, right? And there's also an advantage of being a little bit more precise in the vocabulary. Yeah. Some of the other models that we introduced, I'm assuming that you're familiar with them. I'd like to get your opinion on those real quick, if you don't mind. I think the simplest model is the T-shaped model. I think that's so basic that I don't think we necessarily need to discuss it. The T-shaped model is basically an explanation of all the other models. Are you familiar with the Lominger leadership competency model that Korn Ferry uses, the FYI? Yeah. Any comments on that? What do you think are some of the strengths of that one?
I think it's really very, how to say, again, IPMA related to, IPMA based in the sense that it's really elaborated.
Hold on just a second. Ah, Jesus Christ. The garbage truck just came by. Yeah. You doing okay?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Good.
Luckily, we did not move on because then it's.
Good. Okay. So back to the question. The question was the Lominger model, which consists of 67 competencies: action-oriented, approachability, boss relationship. So it's listening, humor, informing, negotiating. So these are these core competencies. What's your impression on that? I think it's great as a kind of base model, but it's not. I'm kind of answering my own question. It's not necessarily project specific. I think it's a good starting point, but it lacks that. And I also think it's missing a little bit of that measurability of where I am and where I want to go to.
But I think, in my opinion, it measures. It's missing a little observability. Mm-hmm. Number one, and two, it's less relevant to the field of project management.
Okay. So that's you would say. The number one differentiating factor that you have with KOAN versus all of these other competency models is that it's as you said, the 4 criteria. It's concrete, it's observable, it's relevant, and it's accurate. Right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about some of your reports that you do. Right? You've been so kind to send me a whole slew of different information. Hold on, let me pick this up real quick. All right. So let's say your CEO comes to you and says, "Listen, I have this problem." You interview on multiple levels. Let me ask you another question. Are you familiar with the Belbin model?
Yeah.
So one of the things I had some experience with the Belbin model with one of my clients. One thing that I liked about the Belbin model is that it had this concept of we are a team. Diversity in a team is important to create maximum competency. So, and not everybody has the same competency, but it's the blend of different competencies which creates a good team. You need good administrators. You need visionaries. Visionaries and administrators have different skills that don't always match one another, but together we're stronger. Does your competency model take that into perspective a little bit?
It's not really overlapping. I think it's really very specific to the team and the strengths and weaknesses, or what's lacking, or what's so it's a different approach.
Okay.
I don't think it's important. They needed that all models should really fit into at one ultimate model.
Yeah.
I prefer more that you have different way of looking at things. Belbin is one way, and there are a lot of very good models, and best is to use what is most applicable at that moment for that organization.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about some of the reports that you get out of your KOAN system.
Right. So if you project management, so we do have a report specifically related to the IPMA competency model. We have a second report specifically related to the PMI model. And so it says, at the one hand, you get the underlying graph if you want to all the personality elements. More important is the the more applied usage of personality into reports. So basically, you don't need to have a psychological background to understand the reports. So that's our side. It's just like a telephone or a car. You into this inside of a telephone or a car.
Now, this is important. I want to make sure that I'm hearing you correctly, all right? Are you saying that these reports don't necessarily require a psychologist to evaluate and assess?
Absolutely.
That's a great benefit. So are you? It's a tool that you can put it into your client's hand and they can use it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because that's at the end, a project, let's say, a portfolio director should be able to understand what's written there without having again the intervention of a psychologist or some expert in the field. No, you read what's there and to understand it. And so we apply the language of PMI into this report. They're used to use these competencies to see these behaviors. So if one has a score or a very low score, they understand it.
Okay. So do
for an intervention.
Do people need to have some kind of training beforehand to be able to do this, or is this something that's within their normal competency to be able to do?
It should be within the normal competency of the professional.
Okay. Now you said you have the 360 element in there as well. So everybody takes a test. The test gives you feedback about your competencies.
Yeah.
The project manager sits down with his project team. The project sponsor sits down with his project manager. The accountable executive sits down with their sponsor, and they basically look at this this model. Where does the 360 take place?
So the 360 basically, for those who not sure that all people listening to this podcast know 360. So 360 means that you get the same structured questionnaire to a person. So that's why the name is 360. So you have your project sponsor, the program manager, the project.
Ooh, I think you're saying something really important. So because 360 means feedback in both ways. Does that mean that your assessments, your competency assessments, not only based on personal competencies, but that you evaluate the perceived competencies of your staff members as well?
Yeah. So it's not how to say a risk feedback. It's really a one-way feedback. It's the project manager, his program manager, for example, saying on a 1 to 5 scale, up to an extent, see this person acting like this.
Okay. But basically, the assessment is put into two different hands. If I'm the project manager, I will evaluate myself, my perception of myself, and at the same time, my sponsor will fill out the same questionnaire based on their perception of me.
Exactly. So you may say yourself that you do or you don't do something that you are. One of the questions I like in different variations, it's very simple. It's I treat all people with respect. It's a very simple question.
Mm-hmm.
And so you may say of yourself, you may think of yourself that you do. You may have a very high score. And maybe other people around you, they say, no way. You may say, I'm not giving this behavior a lot of effort.
Mm-hmm.
While other people may say, you really do it.
So, but that creates in the three, one of the potentials of 360 is, of course, a certain dissonance and conflict potential. Yeah. Does the questionnaire or does your model help with overcoming this? What's the process of making sure that this discussion remains constructive?
I like to use a three approach more.
What kind of? I'm sorry, your screen starts freezing up a couple times. You like to use what type of method?
I like to use a 3-step method.
Okay, which is?
And I use the abbreviation ASA, ASA, mm-hmm. which for people of our age, they still will know it. And when you had a film time, you had 200 ASA, 400 ASA. Yeah. So it's kind of seeing the light.
Yeah.
So and it's analysis, synthesis, action.
Okay. Analysis, synthesis, action. Okay.
Yeah. So basically in a 360, you get the feedback from all these people in a structured way. It's consolidated in one report. Mm-hmm. And then feedback giver, mm-hmm. even though that word is not really perfect, but it's used most of the time. You discuss with the concerned project manager, portfolio, whatever, mm-hmm. and you try to understand the key element. What are the key elements I can take away from this 360? Mm-hmm. So what are the red lines? The let's say about 100 questions. So what's really the positive sense and also in the negative sense? What should I improve and what should I further on? And something I learned is that it's happening, but most of the time people say they start with thinking, what's wrong? No, this is what's good.
Yeah. Okay. So the kind of package, kind of like when you give a pill to a dog, you want to make sure you put it in a cookie.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's why, so that's the next step. So we say, okay, we first analyze it and then you sleep over. You mm-hmm. take some time because some messages may be very hard. Mm-hmm. Some messages are unexpected in a positive sense. Mm-hmm. So you need to sleep it over. And after 1 or 2 weeks, whatever, then there is a second discussion with the same. So that's a synthesis. Mm-hmm. So how can we bring it back to the essence?
Okay, but like I said, I accept and I think it's a great unique selling proposition of your product that basically you can put this in the hands of your clients and they don't necessarily need to have you present all the time. But I would say this, I'm not certain whether, and I wouldn't even exclude myself in this statement. I don't know whether everybody who uses the 360 methodology has the competency to do it in a constructive and valued sort of way. Do you provide? I'm assuming that you as a person in your institute provides training also on how to do 360 the right way.
Yeah, provide 360 feedback itself because it's important to deliver that. And
or do you provide questions? Do you provide questions in the 360 that help guide the interviewer or the moderator to stay on a constructive emotional level?
No, we do deliver 360 training.
Okay.
So 360 feedback training. So we do deliver the training for givers, mm-hmm. so that a company or individual can say, "Oh, I'm understanding how to be a really good feedback." Yeah. We do the 2 levels. we give the feedback ourselves to companies who want us to do that, or we train people to deliver the feedback.
Okay. So you go through analysis, you go through synthesis, which means where we're crunching the data and the information, you identify where you agree and where you disagree, and then you come up with an action plan. And that action plan would already be, I don't know if you want to call it phase 2 or stage 2, where you say, okay, now we've done the assessment, we want to make it relevant, and we want to make it concrete, and you develop competency developing programs. Who does this? Do you do this? Does the client do this?
Basically, it's the concerned person. Most of the time, it's called the self, the person in the middle of the 360. Mm-hmm. Okay, we can help this person to define the actions, but it's the person himself who should define the action.
Okay, so you leave it kind of with a person that's been evaluated. But shouldn't this be also something where the corporation that's initiated this assessment comes into play and say, listen, we have, PMI, one of the things I like about the resource chapter in the PMBOK guide recently is that there's a clear commitment from PMI to say, listen, the responsibility for competency development is not only self-responsibility, but every project manager, every department head, every corporation should be engaged and committed in the sense of also giving back to the development of every individual. And we all know this. Working on a project, one of the greatest benefits of working on a project is that you learn something that you learn competencies. You're challenged to learn competencies that you didn't have beforehand, right?
Yeah. So that's for me in step 3, action.
Okay.
Step 3, the action. So the self or the person defines together with this coach what actions should be can be help to improve his qualities, to if let's say maybe not eliminate, but to decrease the impact of some lesser behavior that are really having negative. Mm-hmm. But the key is really to grow. Mm-hmm. And then part of step 3 is that for me it's crucial that the person is sharing the action plan with his N+1 and with the stakeholder inside the organization.
Okay, so let's make this more structured. So I don't disagree with you. I think self-responsibility is where it all begins. But it's challenging because it could be, we all know this. It's easy to say, I've self-reflected. I know I have these qualities, but a lot of us slip back into our day-to-day operations, say, hey, I am who I am, right?
But then you stay on a level nice to know.
Yeah. So self-responsibility is one thing. The individual has to define what they want, but this is also a group effort. So you're saying it needs to be coordinated with a coach, assuming that their stakeholder, their superior, their department head, their sponsor sees themselves in a coaching function. I'm assuming, though, that your model also tries to create a link to HR, human relations, or human to the personnel department.
Most of the time, it's one of the stakeholders.
Okay, so they might be involved from a supportive system if it comes to developing trainings and stuff like that.
So that's where you bring it back to the basically the leadership as a feedback giver. You bring it back to the company. The shared ownership of the action plan. Yeah. It's shared between the manager, self, and the stakeholders.
So human resources or personnel would be part of the key stakeholders. So we've gone through. You go through the assessment. You go through the 360. You come up with an action plan. That could be extensive. That could be personal. That could be group based. That could be team based. Right? There's multiple different forms of development strategies where I'm assuming that you coach and provide suggestions.
Yeah, so basically I want to split up 2 things that you just said. So the action plan you should have as an individual. Mm-hmm. Every single individual has to have an action plan or her, mm-hmm. and share it with the stakeholders.
Yeah.
So that it's really, it's really concrete, the company and the stakeholders, what this person is aiming to do and why. And they agree upon.
What I like about what you're saying is, I think the assumption is kind of this passive assumption. I don't have a competency. It's not my fault. Somebody else has to train me, and if I'm trained, then I'll be able to do it, which is not true. I think the coin just dropped with me. What you're basically saying, if, for example, let's go back to the example you said, I think I'm incredibly tolerant and patient, and everybody else says, no, you're not. That I might sit down and do some self-reflection and say, okay, there's an internal view and an external view. I could sit down with an action plan and make a concrete commitment with examples in scenarios, what I intend to do to change that perception of me.
Exactly.
Okay. But I don't just change the perception. It requires me changing my actions. Exactly. Or make an effort in that direction. So I like that about what you say. Let me ask you a question. This action plan, in what time frame should that be set up? Is there a window that you say that's the appropriate size, or is that?
Most of the time, you should think about 6 months to a year.
Okay. Okay. And should there be sit downs with your coach in between, or is it kind of left open for 6 months?
It should be followed up by the N+1.
Okay. Now you keep using the word M+1, which stands for what?
The boss, whoever that you, in one stage higher,
okay,
the boss that you are reporting to.
Okay, good. So action plan, 6 to 12 months with reoccurring retrospectives where you sit down and you kind of get feedback. Okay.
There may be also elements that you say, and then if you consolidate the data from a group, you can have it on a team level, a project management team. You can have it on a program manager, so you consolidate all data for the pool program, or you can have it on a portfolio level, so you can integrate all the data and especially the common elements into one. Say, okay, as a group, we see that we are very strong in this or that, and maybe we have a very low score on one of competencies that is in the long term maybe creating a lot of problems.
Okay. How do you deal with the fear that often comes up of being evaluated? Are there certain guidelines and principles that you follow to
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think confidentiality. And that's again these paradoxes as we talked about. So if you think of these steps, analysis, synthesis, action, the analysis and synthesis, then confidentiality is really extremely important. Also, guaranteed to the person filling out the questionnaire, is consolidated and is not visible, is not traceable. It's more. So I cannot say that person within my team has given me a low score. That's not the aim, because then you're destroying the system.
So you're protecting your source.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you protect the sources and you protect the manager getting back. But, and that's a paradox, the third element, then you put it in the action plan. Then you say, basically, the data are not important for the plan. Yeah, they are important to build it, but not to share it.
I'm the reason that you're getting a little bit of an emotion. I don't know if you've noticed an emotional reaction on
really?
me. Yeah, because there was this brings up a context that I once had. I was recently evaluated by a group of 30 people, and the interaction that I had with them was actually very, very pleasurable, very extensive, and my impression was overall very, very positive, and the feedback was that way as well. But there was a couple outliers, okay, extreme outliers, and I'm where I was like, was this person even in the interaction? Because complete. Now that's the nature of interactions. Yeah. Not everybody perceives every interaction the same way. But using that as an example, do you have some kind of principle to identify outliers and how valid outliers are? Do you I mean, if you have, for example, if you have a bell curve and you have a black swan over here that's way off the chart, how do you deal with something like that?
In the 360, yes, we have established it, you can see whether there is a high difference in the score. Let's say if one within the same group of people, one has scored a 1 on a scale, and the second person a 4 or a 5. So you can see it. There is this kind of gap. But what we don't want to put in the open is a number of people having given a 1 or a 5, because that's human nature, I guess. That people, let's say, if you have like in the 360 systems, you do have you can see the number of people giving a 1 or a 2 or a 4 or a 5, and if this 1 is coming back a number of times, people start, that must be Max, or that must be Pete. And when I then look to the data, it's not Pete and it's not Max, but it's not important.
Yeah. No, so I think anonymity. I agree with you. I think anonymity is important. Sometimes I think the opposite, because I think if you have outliers that where there's a real big gap between the majority opinion and an individual opinion, I think it's important, just for the sake of addressing that issue in a constructive sort of way. It might be helpful to know, is this person just being a troll, or do they have a valid concern, and how do we deal with it? Can I discount the opinion as an outlier, or how do I deal with it? All right.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's always a struggle with an outlier.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes you really have this idea why the hell is he giving this answer?
Yeah. and we all know there's always certain rebels or omegas that want to have a different opinion than everybody else. Let me ask you another question, because there's also a scenario that I have in my head. I once worked in a team in a company where we had an individual, and I'm not judging, but I'm being honest here, that had some serious psychological issues. And this was a manager, and he was taking it out on, and I was on the same level as him, and he was taking it out on the team. Okay. Does your competency model also identify people who have grave issues and may be misplaced in their function?
I did miss the first part of it. Sorry.
Okay. So let me make this scenario again. There are sometimes scenarios where personality and competencies are one thing, where you have people who have certain psychopathies or psychological issues, character issues, maybe even drug issues that makes them an ill-fitted for their position. So people where it's not a competency issue, maybe it is, maybe I'm using the word wrong, but where they're misplaced for the position. They just have certain personality traits which make them inadequate or misplaced for the position, right? Do you have, does your system also identify and address these issues?
You mean like...
Say it again. Unfortunately, your internet is cutting out every once in a while. So say it again.
I can't handle that.
Yeah.
So you mean, for example, people showing toxic...
Yes, toxic behavior is a beautiful bingo word for it.
Yeah.
Like misogyny, or prejudice, or just being a sociopath or a psychopath. I think those are terms that we non-psychologists love to throw around without having a deep and valid understanding of it. But that's I'm using this extreme example. Does your methodology help identify, maybe not in depth, but at least on a superficial level, that there's an issue here, and that training this person and coaching might not be the solution?
Yes, it does indeed identify these elements. It really depends on the kind of report, but when we look at the leadership reports, there it's pretty explicit that we really name it like that, and we explain so where it's coming from. So it really happens, and like things like it shows up. So then we name it, and that makes it concrete again.
So let's take it. Let me take it one step. So you do assess it and you do identify it. How concrete are you? Does your assessment make a recommendation and a drastic recommendation on how to deal with it?
Yeah. Yes, we do. Like, for example, I'm just thinking about this entrepreneurship report which we recently created, and down, and there we written down that this person should avoid at any cost to be responsible for people.
Oh my gosh! Wow, that's awesome. How often do you get that feedback for somebody who's higher up in management?
It's luckily not so very often.
Good.
It really is like, some people are really not how to say, capable of dealing with people. Long time ago, I had a number of medical specialists who had to choose for their specialism in the 4th or 5th year university, or 6th year, I don't know anymore. And so people filled out, and one person, I very explicitly told him, and also in the report we said, okay, really stay away from people as a doctor. And this person has chosen, how do you call that, the people in the morgue.
Oh, sorry, went to the morgue where he was basically a pathologist, or I can't think of the English word.
Or something, who is really in the victims, and he really enjoys it to be alone and work with people.
I think there's a long time ago I picked up a statement. I think it's a feel-good statement, and I think to a certain extent it has a deep validity, and I think it's very humanistic in its statement. And the statement was, every person more or less has some kind of value that they can provide to themselves or to society. And it's not a question of whether people are incompetent. The question is, do you have the right person in the right place? I think that's the question. Would you agree with that statement?
I agree completely with that statement. And then how develop this person further?
Yeah. And so you don't judge if somebody's more introverted, like this example of the medical practitioner who shouldn't deal with people because maybe they're lacking the empathic competencies that would require them. Going into the morgue, or maybe going into research and development, would be a more appropriate thing to do. Yeah,
I think in personality, it's more like you have a number of assets that you want to exploit.
Yeah,
and situation can be different.
Yeah. One other question I wanted to ask you, and it's a simple question that I should have probably asked. If I come to you and say, okay, we're going to do this with our team, we're going to do the assessment. These tests are done online with an IT system, I'm assuming?
Everything is online.
Okay, good. And then the feedback is provided in a short period of time, and whether or not you're involved or that they do it by themselves is something you determine. So we've gone through the 6 to 12-month development stage of going through actions with the coaching sessions in between, with the retrospectives. I'm assuming to be able to measure impact, you do another evaluation after 12 months. Is that correct?
It really depends on the company.
Okay.
Some companies, it's seldom, but of course, in project management, there's a lot of leading the project and all that. So 360 is never after months a kind of a perfect rehearsal, to say.
Oh, I keep asking you very straight line questions, and you give me sometimes paradox answers, but I like them. So you're saying, if I were to answer my question and you can disagree with me, theoretically, yes, because that's kind of the quantitative rational approach to it. In reality, what you're saying is that the reality of project life is dynamic and there are no destinations. It's always a journey. Am I interpreting it right? So it's not about not necessarily just about achieving a certain maturity level. Maturity levels do this. Is that am I understanding you correctly? So some of your clients, I'm assuming, use subjective measurement to say after a year, we feel like we're doing better.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. But if they wanted to have a quantitative, rational validation of that, they could use the assessment again.
Yeah, that's correct.
Good. Well, Lieven, this has been very interesting. I hope we've been able to transfer. I found it very interesting. I hope we've been able to transfer the interest to our listeners as well. If somebody says, you know what, can I get a second or a third opinion on this? Is there any recommended reading that you would say these are good books that leaders or managers should read to kind of open their perspective and their mind when it comes to competency building within their teams?
I must say I'm reading a very diverse book, so it's not really about specifically competency building.
It can be something that's maybe not directly but indirectly. What are some of the literature that you've read or are reading right now that you think is?
Well, very interesting books to me are, for example, book Grit, and then the answer to the book Grit was Range. Very interesting books.
So True Grit and Range were the two books you mentioned?
Grit was the first book.
Grit
as a book.
Yeah.
I'm really bad in names, so I don't recall exactly the right.
We'll blend it into the screen so people.
Is Range.
And
the name of the book that is kind of answer to Grit is Range. So it's Grit. It's really the focus. While Range.
So Grit is about resilience. I'm presuming.
Yes.
And the second title was what?
And the second is Range.
Range.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It means that saying kind of the opposite to the Grit.
Okay.
Like this kind of situation.
So you like this kind of even in your reading, you like the paradox approach to. Okay.
So and then like the book on sleep by Matt Walker.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really Why We Sleep. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
And most interesting books that I've been reading a couple of years ago about decision making, the power of decision making.
I know that one. One of my favorite. Okay, great. One tradition we have in our podcast is that we also ask my wonderful team that you don't always get to see in the background, Rico and Nelly. Do you guys have any questions for Lieven? Okay. The question that Rico had, and I guess it's a legitimate and pragmatic one, is how long does such an analysis process usually take?
And on the number of people that are involved in it.
Okay, that's a good counter answer. So yeah. So a number of people, but we're talking on average.
Each sequence is about 1 to 2 hours.
Okay.
So I would say something like 10 people.
But it theoretically, it's something that we could, if it's let's say a smaller to a medium-sized team, something that could be the assessment itself could be. I'm not talking about feedback, but I'm talking about assessment can be done in a couple of weeks or a month.
That's most of the time, a couple of weeks.
Okay, good. And then really for larger companies, you'd probably just have to add weeks depending on how many teams and how many departments you're doing. Okay. Yeah. Any other questions? KOAN. Yeah. Oh, is that how you pronounce it? KOAN? Okay. Yeah. So Nelly knows it, and she's our Japan expert, so she even pronounced it correctly.
Okay.
Okay. That's such a brilliant question. You're going to have to say it over. Do you remember the wording? Because I love your wording. Say it again. So no. Start off with your definition of KOAN. So it's by definition, KOAN is a riddle that the mind cannot solve. So it kind of taps into this paradox nature of looking at the world. And what was the next part? Okay, and a KOAN, the ambition of a KOAN is to create satori, which is some form of epiphany or recognition or self-reflection. The question that she asks, if you're using this vocabulary and this understanding, what realization or self-realization, if you were to put it into a sentence or a couple words, what does the KOAN system or the KOAN system, what kind of reflection or epiphany can it provide you and your team and your company? Do I need to repeat the question?
Sorry.
I guess another way of asking the question would be, what do you see the biggest impact? Are you familiar with should I define impact? So, you often, your output is that you have an assessment, right? Your outcomes is that your competency is built. Your impact is what? What kind of impact do you have on the world at large with your system?
Well, I would say it on two-level way. Impact on people is that a number of times I've got feedback from people, even after 10 years or longer, that it completely changed their life, really.
So a lasting effect on individuals, right? So, okay, that's one.
Yeah.
And the second?
And so the second is a more global, that people can use it anywhere. And so we do impact in a kind of indirect way, just by having it in the open.
Okay. So the open source concept that people can use it with you or without you is another major impact.
Everything that we publish or that we as a report and all that is open source. I mean, it's source in the sense that you just can't copy it.
Very, very good. Very good. You guys have any other questions? Good. Lieven, thank you so much for your time. I've had a good time. Do you have any questions for me before we?
Sorry,
do you have any questions for me before we end?
For now, no. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Listen, it's been a real pleasure. Thanks a lot for your time and for your expertise, and we'll stay in touch.